If you're one of those who explains the same email 3 times in meetings, who justifies every decision as if defending yourself in court, and who feels that nobody really understands your ideas, you're making the error that Machiavelli identified as fatal, confusing quantity of words with quality of persuasion. Every time you repeat the same explanation, you're sending 3 signals that destroy your credibility: that you don't trust your own clarity, that you're afraid of not being understood, and that you can't identify when someone simply doesn't want to understand you. When you explain something more than twice to the same person, your mind is revealing 3 specific deficiencies. The first is that you haven't developed the ability to synthesize your own ideas. If you can't explain something simply, you don't fully understand it yourself. The second is that you're wasting mental energy on someone who lacks the capacity or willingness to understand. And the third is that you're demonstrating internal insecurity that erodes your authority. Machiavelli observed that experienced diplomats spoke little and were taken seriously. The inexperienced ones filled meetings with detailed explanations and left with bad deals. The difference lay in the ability to know when to stop talking. Your need to explain also reveals fear of others' judgment. You try to anticipate all possible objections, so you keep talking to cover all angles. Robert Cialdini documented in Influence that excessively repeated arguments produce psychological resistance. When you over-explain, the listener's brain activates defense mechanisms. The person may start wondering, why is he trying so hard to convince me? What is he trying to hide? You're also losing strategic control of the conversation. Every extra sentence you speak is an opportunity for contradiction, questioning, or change of focus. You literally provide ammunition for others to find flaws in your logic or steer the discussion into territories where you didn't want to go. The most frustrating part is that you do this with good intentions. You want to be helpful. You want the person to understand. You want to avoid misunderstandings. But excessive explanation generates the opposite effect. When the person asks the same question after you've already explained twice, it's not lack of attention. It's resistance disguised as curiosity. At that moment, you have a choice. Continue wasting energy or apply the first technique that will change your communication forever. Use the verification question. What specifically wasn't clear in the explanation? If the person can't identify a specific point they didn't understand, they probably weren't paying attention or don't really want to understand. At that moment, you stop explaining and say, when you have a specific question, come find me. This isn't rudeness, it's energy conservation. Your mental capacity is limited. Every minute you spend explaining to someone who doesn't want to listen is a minute you're not using to communicate with people who really matter. It's a matter of strategy, not ego. Now you need to master the second technique, strategic silence. After explaining something once, stop talking and observe. Silence forces the person to process what you said or admit they didn't understand. There's also body language that doesn't lie. Checking phones, looking elsewhere, sighing, drumming fingers. The body reveals when the mind isn't interested. Excessive agreement is another warning sign. When someone agrees with everything too quickly, it's a defense mechanism to end conversations they don't want to have. Machiavelli wrote about this while analyzing political negotiations. He noticed that experienced diplomats made a proposal once and waited for the response. If there was resistance without specific counter-proposals, they understood there was no real interest in negotiating. Those who insisted on explaining the benefits of the deal lost bargaining power. The third technique is establishing clear limits on repetition. You can say, I'll explain this once comprehensively. If you have specific questions afterward, ask me about the exact points. This communicates that you value your time and expect focused attention. Now comes the part that separates weak communicators from powerful ones, the ability to synthesize. The person who can explain something complex in few words demonstrates 3 qualities that generate automatic respect: complete mastery of the subject, mental clarity, and internal confidence. Synthesis isn't summary. Summary is cutting words. Synthesis is distilling essence. When you synthesize, you're demonstrating that you've identified what really matters and discarded what's accessory. This requires intellectual maturity that few develop. An experienced accountant explains taxes like this. Your tax is 1,000, based on your profit according to current legislation. An inexperienced accountant details every step, every deduction, every regulation. The first one's client trusts the result. The second one's client gets confused and may become questioning of various points. The difference isn't in technical knowledge, it's in the ability to identify what the client needs to know versus what you know. Synthesis is empathy in action. You adapt your communication to the listener's need, not to your need to show knowledge. There's a practical technique for developing synthesis. Before speaking, ask yourself, if I had only one sentence to explain this, what would I say? That sentence is your core. Everything you add beyond that must have clear justification. Synthesis also demonstrates respect for the listener's time. When you get straight to the point, you're communicating that you value the person's attention. When you ramble, you're communicating that your time is more important than theirs. The mental strength that synthesis demonstrates isn't just intellectual, it's emotional. You need enough confidence to not feel the need to prove you know a lot. You need maturity to accept that not everyone will understand everything. And you need discipline to resist the temptation to show all your knowledge at once. Now comes the fourth technique that will revolutionize your meetings. The rule of 3 points. Every explanation should have a maximum of 3 main points. The human brain processes information better in groups of 3. When you exceed this, you generate cognitive overload and decrease retention. I'll give you a practical example. Instead of saying, the project was delayed because there was a technical problem, the team was overloaded, the client changed requirements, the supplier failed, we had budget issues and the methodology didn't work, you say. The project was delayed for 3 main reasons: unexpected technical problems, client requirement changes, and supplier failure. The fifth technique completely changes how you end your explanations. Always finish with a specific question. Instead of asking, is it clear, ask, which of these 3 causes would you like me to detail? Or, how would you apply this to your project? This tests if the person really understood and transfers responsibility back to them. These 2 techniques alone eliminate most unnecessary explanations. You force your mind to synthesize and force the other person to actively participate in communication instead of passively waiting for you to do all the work. But there's still an element that Machiavelli considered crucial for anyone who wanted to be taken seriously: understanding communication as a power strategy, not just information exchange. Machiavelli understood communication as intellectual warfare, not as information exchange. Every word you speak either reveals power or delivers vulnerability. There's no middle ground. When you over-explain, you're delivering 3 types of ammunition to your opponents: data that can be used against you, contradictions that can be exploited, and evidence of insecurity that can be manipulated. In The Prince, Machiavelli analyzed how Cesare Borgia communicated his decisions. Borgia spoke little, decided quickly, and didn't justify his actions to subordinates. Result: his followers obeyed without question, and his enemies couldn't predict his next moves. Economic communication was a survival strategy. You need to understand that information is power, and shared power is diminished power. Every extra detail you reveal is control you're giving to another person. This doesn't mean being secretive or manipulative. It means being strategic about what, when, and how you communicate. There's a crucial difference between transparency and overexposure that you need to master. Transparency is showing what's relevant to the decision or relationship. Overexposure is showing everything you know or feel, regardless of relevance. The first generates trust. The second generates vulnerability. Machiavelli observed that effective politicians use 3 principles in communication. The first was to speak only when they had something important to say. The second is never to reveal more information than necessary to achieve the objective. The third is always to leave room for interpretation, never explain every nuance. When you apply these principles at work, you notice an immediate change in how people react to you. Your opinions carry more weight because they're rarer. Your explanations are more impactful because they're more concise. Your decisions are more respected because they don't come accompanied by defensive justifications. The 6th technique that Machiavelli valued is using strategic pauses. After explaining an important point, stop talking for 3 seconds. This gives time for the information to be processed and communicates that you have control over the conversation's pace. Those who rush to fill silences demonstrate anxiety. Have you noticed that high-level people speak little in meetings? It's not arrogance, it's strategy. They know that word scarcity creates perception of value. When they finally speak, everyone pays attention because they know it will be important. The 7th technique is what he called verbal economy. Every word you use must have a specific function: inform, persuade, or clarify. Words without specific function are noise that diminishes your message's impact. Practice this right now. Before answering any question today, ask yourself, does this word add value or is it just habit? You'll discover you speak 40% less and communicate 60% better Machiavelli understood that effective communication isn't about making everyone understand everything. It's about making the right people understand enough to make necessary decisions. This mindset completely changes how you approach important conversations. Do you agree that speaking less can give more authority, or do you think this is too cold? I want to see your argument in the comments. But theory without practical application is a waste of time. There are 3 more specific techniques that will immediately transform your daily conversations. The 8th technique will save you from infinite explanations. Develop the ability to say, "That's all you need to know for now." Some information is progressive. The person needs to master the basics before understanding the advanced. Trying to explain everything at once is a recipe for confusion. I'll give you a real-world example. A manager explained complex computer systems to new users, trying to cover all functionalities in the first meeting. Result? Confused employees, more questions, more meetings. Today he explains only what's essential to get started and says, "When you master these functions, we'll schedule the next step." Result? Confident employees, fewer questions, less time wasted. You need to understand that information overload generates paralysis, not clarification. When you dump everything you know at once, you're forcing the person to process more than their cognitive capacity allows. This isn't didactic, it's self-sabotage. The 9th technique completely changes how you structure explanations. Use concrete examples instead of abstract theories. Instead of explaining concepts, show practical applications. The human brain understands better through stories and specific situations than through generic principles. Compare these 2 ways of explaining the same concept. Abstract version. Effective delegation requires clarity of expectations, defined deadlines, and follow-up mechanisms. Concrete version. When you delegated the report to John, you said exactly what you wanted, set Friday as deadline, and scheduled a 15-minute meeting on Wednesday to check progress. The difference is that in the second version, the person can visualize exactly how to apply it. In the first, they understand the concept but don't know how to execute. Concrete examples build bridges between theoretical knowledge and practical application. This technique works because you're speaking the language the human brain processes best, specific narrative. Instead of forcing the person to translate abstract concepts into real situations, you already deliver the ready translation. But there's one last technique that definitively closes any important conversation. Always end with a 1-sentence summary. "So what we decided is X." This confirms understanding and prevents future misunderstandings. It also demonstrates that you can synthesize complex discussions. The 10th technique is what separates professional communicators from amateur ones. The application test. After explaining something, ask the person to explain how they would apply it in practice. If they can't do this specifically, they didn't really understand, but now it's their problem to seek clarification, not your problem to explain again. This technique reveals if there was real comprehension or just superficial agreement. Most people agree to end the conversation, not because they really understood. The application test forces intellectual honesty from both sides. I'll give you an example of how to apply it. Instead of asking, "Did you understand how to do the report?" ask, "Explain to me the first 3 steps you'll follow to start the report." If the person can detail the steps, they understood. If they give vague answers, they need more clarification. This also transfers responsibility. When you test application, you're communicating that you expect competent execution, not just passive understanding. The person knows they'll be held accountable for results, not intentions. Which of these techniques do you think would be hardest to apply in your life? Comment honestly below. These 10 techniques aren't communication tricks. They're demonstrations of mental strength that few master. When you stop over-explaining, you're not being less helpful. You're being more efficient. You're not being less didactic. You're being more respectful of everyone's time. Remember, powerful communication isn't about impressing with knowledge. It's about achieving specific objectives with maximum efficiency. When you master these techniques, you realize you can have more influence by speaking less, not more. Over-explanation is a habit that develops from insecurity and persists from lack of technique. You've spent your whole life believing that more words mean better communication. Machiavelli proved the opposite 500 years ago. Those who have real power don't need to prove they have power. Starting today, you have a simple choice. Continue wasting energy explaining to those who don't want to understand, or apply these 10 techniques and discover what it's like to have your words respected. The difference isn't in what you know, it's in how you communicate what you know. Every conversation is an opportunity to practice. Every explanation is a chance to apply synthesis. Every silence is a demonstration of confidence. You don't need to change who you are. You need to change how you communicate. When you stop over-explaining, you stop seeming weak. When you stop seeming weak, you stop being treated as weak. And when you stop being treated as weak, you discover you always had the power to be respected. You just didn't know how to use that power. Over-explanation isn't intellectual generosity. It's insecurity disguised as didactics. Synthesis isn't mental laziness. It's intellectual mastery in action. Strategic silence isn't emotional coldness. It's conscious communicative control. Machiavelli observed that the most respected men of his era had one characteristic in common. They knew when to stop talking. They understood that explanation is a tool, not an obsession. That clarity is an objective, not an infinite process. That respect is earned with presence, not with verbosity. Now you understand why over-explanation makes you seem weak. It's not about the content you communicate. It's about the mental posture you reveal. Every extra word you speak, after the necessary explanation, is a confession that you don't trust your own communicative competence. You have everything you need. 10 practical techniques, proven philosophy, concrete examples. The only thing missing is discipline to apply when you feel like explaining for the third time. This discipline is what separates weak communicators from powerful ones. Now you understand the difference between talking a lot and communicating well. Click the video on screen to discover other Machiavelli strategies that transform apparent weakness into real strength. Click the video on screen now.